It started with 6 words. Cold, careless, heavy like lead. Why don't you go back to India? The room froze. The air dropped. And Kash Patel didn't move. Not a first, not a blink, not a flinch. But inside a wildfire lit. Because in that moment, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every brown kid who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Every immigrant whose roots were questioned. Every soldier who fought for a flag while being asked if they were really American. It all came crashing into that moment. That stage, that silence, and the woman who said it. Karoline Leavitt smiled. Like she thought she'd won. The debate had been tense from the beginning. Karoline was sharp, young, and fearless. Kash was calm, measured, and dangerous in the way that only the truth can be. Two conservatives. Same stage, different wars. Karoline wanted fire. Kash brought facts. She cut him off. Repeated headlines. Mocked nuance. He stayed steady. He wasn't new to this. He'd seen worse. But no one saw that insult coming. Not like that. Not with a live mic. Not on national television. And not from her. The moderators froze. The cameras didn't. The audience murmured, then gasped. It echoed like a crackdown. The center of the room, Kash, just stood there. Still, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he was deciding. Should he say it like a man, or like a soldier? Because he had been both. And both were tired of swallowing dignity to keep things civil. Karoline shifted in her seat. Tried to laugh it off. I mean, she chuckled. I'm just saying if he hates America so much. But she didn't finish the sentence. Because Kash finally spoke. And when he did, his voice didn't rise, it dropped. Low. Controlled razor sharp, you know. He said, I was born in Queens, New York. I served in combat zones overseas. I've been a federal prosecutor. I've sat in war rooms with the President of the United States. So when you tell me to go back to India, what you're really saying is, you'll never be one of us. The room went still again. But this time, no one was laughing. Karoline opened her mouth to speak, but the moderator cut in too late. Let's keep this respectful. Please. Kash didn't look at the moderator. His eyes were on Karoline, not with anger, with precision, with all due respect, he said. You don't get to define my patriotism. You haven't earned that. A long, brutal silence followed. Then a single clapped out from somewhere in the crowd. Then another, and another, until the sound filled the hall like something sacred had just been broken. And finally, people saw the crack. Later, the clip would go viral. It would hit Twitter before the credits rolled. Millions of views, dozens of angles, thousands of comments. But in that moment on that stage, it wasn't about cameras. It was about something deeper, older, a wound this country keeps pretending doesn't exist, until someone slices it open with a smile, and someone else refuses to bleed quietly. After the debate, Karoline's team went into full damage control. She said she was taken out of context, that Kash misunderstood her meaning, that America should be a place where we all feel safe. But no one bought it, because America had heard her meaning loud and clear. And for once, it didn't look away. Kash didn't do interviews. That night, he went home, took off his suit, sat on the edge of his bed, looked at his reflection in the dark window, and thought about his parents. Immigrants from Gujarat. His father drove a bus in Jersey. His mother worked night shifts at the hospital. They never complained. They only said, work hard, be grateful, keep your head down. But tonight he didn't want to keep his head down. Tonight he remembered every time they were called foreigners, every time he had to spell his name slower, every time someone said, where are you really from? And tonight he answered. He pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, and began typing. I was born here. I bled for here. You don't get to tell me to leave. I'm not going anywhere. He hit post. And went to sleep. Not angry, not shaken, just steady. And finally seen. The next morning, America woke up to a different conversation. It wasn't about tax reform. It wasn't about party loyalty. It wasn't about red versus blue. It was about a 6-word insult. And the man who didn't let it slide. Across newsrooms. The debate clip played on loop. Cable hosts dissected it. Podcasts re-aired the audio. But nothing hit harder than the silence. After Kash's response, the moment Karoline went quiet, the moment the room realized, they weren't just watching a debate. They were watching a line get drawn. A line between decency and venom. And Kash Patel had drawn it in stone. Online, the noise was deafening. Support poured in. Veterans, Immigrants. Children of immigrants. Americans. Who'd spent their entire lives being told they were almost part of the story. But never quite. One tweet read, "My father served in Vietnam and was told to go back to Korea. Thank you, @Kash." Another, "This wasn't just for him. This was for all of us." But not everyone applauded. Some doubled down. Anonymous accounts posted clips of Kash mispronouncing a town during a speech from years ago, using it as proof he was not really American. One cable pundit asked, was he being too sensitive? A conservative blogger wrote, he chose to be offended. Get over it. Karoline herself posted a vague tweet. America is great because of free speech. I stand by my record. She didn't mention Kash by name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. Everyone saw. And Kash. He said nothing. Not yet. 3 days passed. No interviews, no statements. Just silence. And in that silence, the country held its breath. Because whether you agreed with him or not, one thing was clear. Kash Patel had become a mirror. And some people didn't like what they saw. Meanwhile, Kash sat in a small, quiet room in Virginia. A church basement. Folding chairs. Weak coffee. A circle of veterans. No cameras. No politics. Just stories. He spoke last. Told them what happened. Told them about the stage, the words, the silence that followed. One of the men, older, leaned forward. You handled it with more grace than I would have, he said. Kash shook his head. I wasn't trying to be graceful. I was trying not to explode. Another man spoke. You didn't walk away from it. That takes more strength than hitting back. And Kash felt something shift inside. Because the truth was, he had thought about hitting back. Hard, publicly. With all the fire and fury he had every right to unleash. But he didn't cause to, because somewhere deep down, he wanted more than to win. He wanted to be understood. That night, he sat down with a friend, former Navy black, grew up in Mississippi. They talked over drinks, and at one point, his friend said, you know what that was, right? What? A test. Kash looked at him. A test to see if you'd break, he continued. If you'd lose it. If you'd confirm every stereotype there, hoping you'll live up to. Kash exhaled. They wanted a moment. They wanted a headline, his friend said. But you gave them a message. A pause, even if they're not ready to hear it yet. The next day, an op-ed appeared. Not from Kash, from his mother. Quiet, private, kind. She had never written anything public in her life. But this time, she did. She wrote, I came to this country with $9 and a dream. I worked nights. My husband worked days. We raised our son to be respectful, but to never accept disrespect. That stage insulted every parent who sacrificed so their children could be free. And I'm proud of my son. For standing tall, when it would have been easier to walk away. The piece went viral. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. And truth is hard to ignore. Karoline held a rally that weekend. Packed gym, loud music, American flags. She walked on stage with confidence. But there was a tension in the room. A crack just beneath the surface. She opened with jokes. Talked about Biden, gas prices, woke culture. Then she said, and you know what? If you don't like America, maybe you should leave. Some clapped. Others hesitated. And in that pause, you could feel something changing. Not in her, in the room, in the people. Because suddenly, those words didn't feel strong. They felt small. Not patriotic. Just cruel. The cameras picked it up. Commentators caught it. The polls began to dip. Not because people flipped parties, but because something had pierced the noise. A man who didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't break. He just stood still and told the truth. And the truth had started to ripple. Kash finally agreed to one interview. Live, no edits, no pre-screened questions, just a conversation. It aired on a Tuesday night. The host asked, why did you wait to respond? Kash said, because I didn't want to react. I wanted to reflect. Are you angry? I was. Are you hurt? A pause. Yes. Do you think she's racist? Another pause. I think she said something racist. Whether or not that's who she is, only she knows. The host nodded slowly. And what would you say to her right now? Kash looked into the camera, calm, clear. I don't want an apology. I want her to understand what she said. I want her to realize that this country isn't just made of the people who look like her. It's made of people like me, like my parents, like millions of Americans who have earned this soil with their sweat and sacrifice. He paused. And we're not going anywhere. No dramatic music, no applause. Just that. And somehow, It landed harder than any shouting ever could. Because when a man tells the truth, without trying to hurt you, that's when it cuts the deepest. That night, social media changed. The hashtags shifted. The conversation grew. Not louder, wider, because this wasn't just about Kash anymore. It was about every person who's ever been told to go back when they already belonged. They called it the most unexpected moment of the election season. A town hall in Pennsylvania, Middle America, Purple State. Moderate voters, Karoline Leavitt and Kash Patel, booked on the same night. Not a debate, not even planned, but fate has a way of circling back to unfinished things. The moderator didn't bring it up, but someone else did. A woman in the audience, late 50s, short gray hair, glasses. Her voice didn't shake. She just asked, "Ms. Leavitt, do you regret what you said to Mr. Patel?" Silence. Karoline smiled, paused, then said, "I regret the way it was interpreted." The room shifted, subtle, but noticeable. The woman pressed again. "Would you say it again today?" Karoline hesitated, then said, "I would say anyone who this country should find another one." A few claps, but most people stayed quiet. Then the moderator turned to Kash, asked if he wanted to respond. He nodded, but didn't look at Karoline. He looked at the woman in the crowd, the one who had asked the question, and he said, "My parents had never been on a plane before they came here. They didn't know the language. They just believed America meant something. They believed you could work hard, do right, and be free." He took a breath. "And then I wore the uniform. I fought in places where people don't even have clean water. I came back and was told I should leave the country I bled for. Not by a stranger, but by someone who claims to love it more than I do." The room held still. No one looked away. "But I didn't walk off that stage because I was hurt," Kash said. "I walked off because I refused to let someone else define what it means to be American." Then he looked at Karoline. "I didn't come here tonight to be your villain. I came here to remind people of something simple. This country isn't a bloodline. It's a promise." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't awkward, it was sacred. That clip went everywhere. Millions of views. Within hours, Kash wasn't trending because he was angry. He was trending because he wasn't. Because he stayed calm in the storm. And somehow, that hit harder than fire ever could. Backstage, Karoline approached him. The cameras were gone. Just her, and him, and everything unspoken between them. She didn't smile this time. She didn't joke. She just said, "You made your point." Kash looked at her. "I wasn't trying to make a point." She raised a brow. "Then what were you doing?" He paused, then said, "Setting a boundary." She nodded slowly, then asked, "Do you think I'm racist?" He sighed. "You want honesty?" She nodded. "I think you don't see what you don't see." A long pause. Then, "I grew up around people who said things like that all the time," she said. "It never felt wrong. It never had to," he said. "Because it wasn't pointed at you." They stood there in the quiet dot. No one raised a voice, no one stormed off. Just two people, standing in a moment that didn't ask for headlines. Just truth, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of understanding. Later that night, Kash sat in a hotel room, alone. The TV was off. The lights were dim. He opened his laptop. An email caught his eye. Subject line, "I'm 14, and I look like you." He clicked it. It read, "My name is Rakesh. I live in Ohio. I've been told to go back to my country 3 times this year." I didn't know what to say. But then I saw your video. And now I know I belong here just as much as anyone else. Thank you. Kash leaned back, closed his eyes, and felt it. Not pride, not victory. Something quieter, something deeper. Relief. The next morning, a headline broke. Karoline Leavitt cancels 3 rallies without explanation. Speculation flew. Was she stepping back? Was her campaign unraveling? Her team said it was logistics. But insiders knew better. Something had shifted. Not just in the race. In her. Because once you hear yourself say something that ugly and watch the world not flinch, you have to live with the echo. And the echo never lies. A week later, she posted a video. Simple. No makeup. No filter. She sat in front of a fireplace and looked directly into the camera. And she said, "I've said some things that hurt people. Whether I meant them to or not, doesn't matter. They hurt. And I've had to sit with that. And I want to say I'm sorry, especially to Mr. Patel. He didn't ask for that moment. He didn't deserve it. And he handled it with more strength than I did. I still believe in this country. But now I'm starting to understand who it belongs to. Everyone." She ended the video quietly. No music, no HASHTAGS, just her face, and a stillness she hadn't shown before. Kash watched it in silence, didn't repost it, didn't react. He didn't need to, because something had already shifted, not just in Karoline, in the culture, in the story, in the idea that belonging had a look, or a name, or an accent. That week, a school in rural Texas held an assembly. The principal played Kash's town hall clip for the students. Afterwards, a young girl raised her hand and said, "My family's from Ghana. Someone told me to go back, but I'm staying." The room applauded. And somewhere, far away, Kash Patel walked through an airport terminal. No entourage. No headlines. Just a man, with his luggage, and his spine intact. The election season rolled on. More debates, more ads, more noise. But one moment stayed, a moment without shouting, without applause, just 6 words, and a silence that split the country in two. And then a voice that answered without rage. Kash never tried to capitalize on it. No MERCH, no slogans, no victory lap. He just kept doing what he'd always done. Show up, speak clearly. Stand still. One morning, weeks after the fire had died down, he visited his parents. Same neighborhood, same house. Smell of chai in the kitchen. His mother was folding clothes. Quiet. His father watched the news, louder than necessary. They didn't say much about the scandal. They never had. But when Kash stepped outside, his father followed, stood beside him, looked out at the old oak tree in the yard, then said, without looking at him, "We used to think if we were just good enough, they'd stop asking us to leave." Kash nodded. "I know." His father looked down at his hands. "They still ask." Kash looked at him. "But now we answer." A long silence. Then his father smiled, quiet and proud. And that said everything. Country kept moving, but the echo of that moment stayed. In classrooms, in kitchens, in quiet conversations at gas stations and barbershops and around folding chairs at VFW halls, because something had cracked, not broken, just cracked enough to let a little more light in. Karoline didn't win her race, but she didn't disappear either. Months later, she appeared on a panel, different tone, different fire. Someone brought up the moment with Kash. She didn't dodge. She said, "I was wrong, and he gave me more grace than I gave him. I'm still learning what that means." And for once, nobody jeered. They just listened. Because accountability, when it's real, doesn't come loud. It comes slow, and it stays. Kash was invited to speak at a university, not a red state, not a blue one, just a school full of kids who needed to hear from someone who had stood in the fire and walked out holding his dignity like a flag. He didn't give a speech. He told a story about a question that became a mirror, about a man who stayed calm when it would have been easier to burn it all down. And at the end he said, "I don't want to be remembered for how I responded to an insult. I want to be remembered for not letting it define me." The room stood, not because he asked, but because they needed to, because something in them stood too. Later, as he walked to the parking lot, a student caught up to him. Brown skin, shy voice, fresh notebook clutched to his chest. He said, "I've been afraid to speak in class. I thought maybe I wasn't American enough to have a voice." Kash turned to him, looked him in the eye. "You don't need anyone's permission to be who you already are." The student nodded, then asked, "Do you think it ever gets easier?" Kash smiled. "No, but it gets clearer." And that was enough. That night, Kash sat on his porch. No headlines, no cameras, just wind, and the sound of the country breathing. He thought about all the people who would never know his name, but who might carry a little more of themselves into tomorrow, because of something he didn't let slide. Not out of anger, out of love. Love for his name, his roots, his silence, and the flag he still believed in, even when others tried to tear it out of his hands. The screen fades slowly to black. Not with fire, not with fanfare, just the final line of a story that didn't ask for permission to matter. They told him to go back, but he never left. Because America was always home. And this time America listened.